My grandmother is not who she says she is. I found out when I was 10. It was late at night and I was sneaking around the house. I wasn't supposed to be up, but something was bothering me. I heard a sound. It was like humming, but deeper. I followed it to her room. The door was slightly open. I saw her sitting in the middle of the floor, holding something. At first, I thought it was a doll, but when she lifted it, I realized it was a skull. A human skull. She was whispering to it in a language I didn't understand. Her eyes were closed, and her voice was shaking. I froze. She didn't see me, but I saw everything. She kissed the skull, then gently placed it inside a wooden box. After that, she sat there in silence for a long time before finally blowing out the candle. The next morning, she was back to being the loving, soft-spoken grandmother I always knew. She made breakfast, laughed with my parents, and acted like nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget what I saw. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Weeks went by, and I noticed small things. My grandmother never let anyone touch that wooden box. She always kept it in a corner of her room, hidden under blankets. I caught her several times talking to it late at night. She would chant softly, her face pale in the dim light of a single candle. One night, I made a mistake. I was curious. Too curious. When everyone was asleep, I crept into her room. The box was there, like always, covered with a cloth. I lifted the cloth, just to see inside. The skull was smaller than I remembered. Old. Fragile. Something about it made me feel sick, like it didn't belong here. Suddenly, I felt cold fingers on my arm. I jumped, turning around, and there she was, my grandmother. Her eyes were dark, almost hollow, as she stared at me. "You shouldn't have touched it," she whispered. Her voice was different. I tried to apologize, but the words wouldn't come out. She grabbed the box from me and cradled it like a baby. Her voice was shaking again, like that night. "This was my firstborn," she said, almost in a trance. "She died many years ago, but she never left. She stays with me always." I didn't understand. I couldn't move. "I made a promise," she said, her eyes wide and wet, "to keep her close, to never let her go. If the spirits find out she's gone, they'll come for us. All of us." I backed away, scared of what she was saying. It sounded like a warning. After that night, my grandmother changed. She watched me, like she knew I might tell someone. Her eyes followed me everywhere, and every night, I could hear her talking to the box, to the skull. I finally told my mom, but she didn't believe me. She said Grandma was just old, that I was imagining things. But I wasn't. I saw it. I heard her. 2 weeks later, my grandmother died in her sleep. After the funeral, I went into her room. The wooden box was gone. My mother told me she buried it with her. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that deep humming sound. And I swear it's coming from under the floor. After my grandmother died, things went back to normal, but as the years passed, everything got worse. It started with dreams. I started seeing her almost every night, standing in the dark, holding the box. Her face was twisted, as if she was angry or scared. I couldn't tell. She would reach out to me, whispering in that same shaky voice, "It's not over. They're coming." I tried to forget about it, but the dreams wouldn't stop. The nights when I didn't dream about her, I would wake up to scratching sounds, like something was moving underneath the floorboards. At first, I thought it was rats, but it was too slow, too deliberate. It felt like whatever was under there was trying to get out. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The noise was louder than ever, almost like whispering now, and I was shaking with fear. I ran to my mom's room, trying to tell her, trying to explain everything again, but she still wouldn't listen. "Enough already," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. "It's been years since your grandmother died. You have to let her go." But that was the thing, I couldn't. And I wasn't sure she had really gone at all. The next day, I did something desperate. I went to see a man who lived on the edge of our village, a healer who people only went to in secret. He was known for dealing with spirits, the kind people didn't talk about. I was scared to go, but I needed answers. I needed to know why this was happening to me. When I told him about the box, the skull, and the dreams, he didn't look surprised. His face grew serious, and he told me that my grandmother had made a dangerous pact with the spirits of the dead, something she hadn't fulfilled. "Your grandmother was afraid of death," the healer said, her voice low. "She couldn't let go of her firstborn. She tried to keep the spirit close, but you can't cheat the dead. They always come for what's theirs." I asked him what I could do. How could I stop it? The man handed me a small pouch filled with strange-smelling herbs and bones. "Bury this at the crossroads," he said. "And whatever you do, don't look back when you leave. If you look back, they'll know you're scared, and fear is what they feed on." That night, I followed his instructions. I went to the crossroads outside our village, dug a small hole, and buried the pouch. My hands were shaking the entire time, but I kept my head down. I could feel something watching me, something heavy and dark, but I didn't look up. I didn't dare look back. As soon as I placed the last handful of dirt on the pouch, the air around me changed. It felt lighter, quieter. I hurried home, fighting the urge to glance over my shoulder. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. But peace didn't last long. A few days later, I found the box. I wasn't looking for it, but there it was, sitting in the back of my grandmother's old closet. My mom swore she buried it with her, but somehow it was back, untouched. I didn't want to open it, but something inside me, maybe the same curiosity that got me into this mess, made me lift the lid. The skull was there, but now it was cracked, like it had been through something terrible. As soon as I saw it, the room grew cold, and I heard the whispers again. Only this time, they were louder. The spirits hadn't gone. They were angry. I rushed back to the healer, clutching the box in my hands, begging him to help me. He looked at the skull and shook his head slowly. "The spirits are still tied to this. You need to let it go. Truly let it go." I asked him how. What else could I do? He told me I had to take the skull to the place where my grandmother had made her pact, the place where the child had died. There, I would need to perform a ritual to release the spirit once and for all. I didn't want to go, but I had no choice. I found the spot deep in the forest, where my grandmother had once lived before moving to our village. The place felt wrong, even before I stepped foot in it. The air was thick, and the trees seemed to close in around me. I followed the healer's instructions exactly. I built a small fire, scattered the herbs around the skull, and spoke the words he had given me. As I chanted, I could feel something stirring, something old and angry. The ground beneath me trembled. Suddenly, the fire flared up, and a cold wind swept through the trees. I heard them, the spirits. They were everywhere, whispering, hissing. I wanted to run, but I kept chanting, my voice shaking. And then, just as quickly as it started, the wind died down. The whispers stopped. The fire flickered out. It was over. I buried the skull there, in the cold earth. As I covered it with dirt, I felt a strange sense of peace, like something heavy had finally lifted. When I got back home, the box was gone. The sounds under the floorboard stopped. The dreams, they stopped, too. I think my grandmother finally found peace. Or maybe it was me who did. The moral lesson of this story is that secrets, especially those involving unresolved pasts and harmful choices, can haunt not only the person who hides them but also future generations. It highlights the importance of facing one's past, letting go of unhealthy attachments, and seeking peace instead of trying to control forces beyond human understanding. The story also warns against the dangers of fear and curiosity. Sometimes, there are things better left undisturbed, and as parents lean to give your kids listening ears.